That's where the trouble began. That smile. That damn smile.
Okay, I know the Dracthyr look isn't for everyone, but this weekend I strapped on my scales and dove into some Mythic Plus to see if the recent buffs to Preservation's defensiveness and instant cast echoes were enough to make me reconsider it as a main for Dragonflight Mythic Plus Season 1, so let's get right into what I found. Perception from the WoW community for Preservation Evoker has been up and down since its announcement. It went from awe at its unique playstyle and raw healing and damage output, to concern over its limited range and lack of defensiveness, and opinions still differ greatly among outspoken members of the community. Personally, the first new healing spec in years that I know will be closely tied to the lore of the new expansion and pushing keys on a spec that no one's played before is really appealing, but since its release on beta I've had concerns about some of these red flags around Preservation gameplay. But after some recent buffs, how does Preservation Evoker feel in Mythic Plus dungeons, and how does it compare to the rest of the healers? Let's start with the good, the best of the good in fact, AoE damage. Preservation Evoker pumps in AoE, and you aren't exactly going to be straining yourself to get the damage out either. Laying down a fire breath over a large pack of mobs, following it up with a living flame which will cleave due to the leaping flame talent, and do a fat single target heal on someone with the Life Giver's flame talent, and then throwing down a deep breath, if it's up, on a 2-minute cooldown, will cause a burst that no other healer in the game can compete with, hands down. That's a big deal, and it's always an excellent thing when a healer's damage converts into any form of healing. And you can get all this out in the first couple seconds of a pull. After that, you're on to Living Flame spam for the most part. Being able to pump AoE without really impacting your healing rotation is a nice perk for any healer to have in Mythic Plus. Another plus, AoE healing. Preservation can absolutely pump AoE healing, and despite its label as an advanced class, it's actually incredibly easy to pull it off if you can hold down a button for a couple of seconds. Spirit Bloom alone can take care of most AoE situations, but you've also got Dream Breath. Both of those spells can be made instant with the Tip the Scales talent. You've also got Rewind, which basically undoes any damage that was taken over the last 5 seconds that you can use as a panic button. You can even save up a Dream Breath and Spirit Bloom in a stasis if you really need to push out some serious AoE healing. Not to mention your group-wide damage reduction in Zephyr. Preservation is basically overloaded with abilities you can use to keep your group up in AoE situations. Let's get into this new instant echo thing, because this is what really drew me back toward Preservation after I had sort of excluded it from my top list of what I would be maining in Dragonflight. I mentioned in previous videos that I felt something was clunky or missing from Preservation healing, and I think the cast time on Echo might have actually been it. Being able to follow up the Echo GCD immediately with another heal spell was an absolute game changer. It removed a big element of needing to pre-plan your Echo usage, and now feels like a button that just supercharges your next healing spell essentially. I found myself using Echo way more in general, using it liberally and even throwing out some Echo reversions, which started to really activate my 4-set Living Flame procs like crazy, giving me more Essence Burst procs for Disintegrates or even more Echoes, and really enhanced the feel of the spec. This was kind of how I hoped the 4-set would work when I first saw it. Instant Echo smoothed out the healing rotation quite a bit, in a way that I would like to see another part of the Evoker class get a quality of life change, mobility, which we'll get to in a minute. So while not on the level of Druid or Paladin in the utility department, Evoker can definitely hold its own. You've got an AoE disrupt with Tail Swipe, a knockback in Wing Buffet, a kick that's a very practical talent to take in Quell, the ability to dispel basically anything in a pinch with Cauterizing Flame, an idiot relocation tool with Fly With Me, Bloodlust, party-wide AoE damage reduction with Zephyr, and single target damage reduction, or stagger, or whatever you want to call it, with Time Dilation. So let's get into some of the negatives or things that I was worried about going into this weekend of big time Preservation Evoker play. Let's get into defensives. When M+ and raid testing initially went live, it quickly became apparent that Evoker needed some help in the defensive department, and Blizzard reworked Obsidian's scales to be a 200% armor and 30% magic damage reduction to a flat 30% damage reduction across the board, and took it from a 2.5 minute cooldown down to a 1.5 minute cooldown. Then they also changed the Obsidian scales talent from reducing the cooldown of Bulwark by a minute to just giving it an extra charge, and this quickly took Obsidian Bulwark to one of the best personal defensives in the game, in my opinion. And then they also added a new passive for preservation called Tempered Scales, giving it a passive armor bonus of 75%. In my test runs this weekend, I didn't really find defensiveness to be an issue this go around. Obsidian Bulwark with 2 charges seemed like it was almost always up when I needed it, and that 30% damage reduction was really solid. It's important for Evoker too, as we'll talk about in a minute. Since your single target spot healing isn't great, you don't have an easy time of just picking up your own health bar as some specs do. But you do have Emerald Communion, which you can use to keep yourself up through even stuns, and if it tops you off, it will heal others as well. All in all, I didn't really feel like defensiveness felt like an issue on the spec anymore. Alright, let's get into mobility, which is something I do think is still an issue for Preservation Evoker. Evoker has been presented as a high mobility class, but I wouldn't even put it in the top 3 healers in terms of mobility. You've really only got Hover, which only has 2 charges if you talent into it, which is obviously required, and Verdant Embrace, your biggest single target heal that zips you to the target you're healing. But that in and of itself is not necessarily a good thing. Lots of times people that need big single target heals are standing in places I don't want to be, or are blocked from me by a wide variety of mechanics that Verdant Embrace does not protect me from. Hover on the GCD also makes it feel a little bit clunky, and I think it would be worthwhile to test it off the GCD. Then you've also got the Fly With Me talent, which grabs another player and moves them to another place with you. But Fly With Me is very situational, and on a full minute cooldown that doesn't really present itself as a practical mobility tool in most situations. These abilities give the illusion of a very mobile class, when in reality, playing Evoker in keys feels really slow. Let's get to one of the other elephants in the room with Evoker, the range issue. The recent increase from 25 yards to 30 was actually a pretty significant increase, and in dungeon content, you're really only going to notice this on specific bosses. Unsurprisingly, there are several dungeon bosses in Dragonflight that are, big dragons in open rooms, with mechanics that often cause your group to spread out all over the place. These fights can even cause fits at normal range healers at times, and Preservation's mobility tools sometimes don't really do the trick if you're separated from an ally by a dangerous mechanic here. Still, I found the lower range to be more of an occasional inconvenience than like a major flaw I was constantly playing around, but it will rear its ugly head from time to time at some of the least opportune moments. My other real concern with Preservation is single target healing, and although I think this might be being overemphasized as a problem by some, it's definitely not great. You've got Verdant Embrace, which as I mentioned is a big chunky heal, but can have its usefulness limited by mechanics between you and your target. Beyond that, you basically got Living Flame. Now, Instant Cast Echo makes Echo Living Flames a lot more realistic and viable. You can also break off a level 1 Spirit Bloom in a pinch to use as a spot heal, which is fine, as long as you're not going to need its AoE power too shortly afterwards. Time Dilation is also pretty solid external defensive, essentially turning someone into a Brewmaster Monk for a few seconds. Echo Reversions also pump a surprising amount of healing into a single target if they're not taking imminently lethal damage as well. So does Preservation have a chance at being one of the top M+ healers? I actually think it does, believe it or not, if for no other reason than if its damage potential is really the highest of any healer, high-level teams will find a way to make it work. For us Pug players who just want to know if the spec is going to be viable to play because of squishiness or ranged issues or lack of single target healing, after spamming Preservation the whole M+ weekend, I feel pretty confident saying that it is. Yes, range is going to be an issue at times. You can't pump single target heals like a holy priest, but I could write a sentence like that about any healer in the game. They all have weaknesses by design, that's why we have different classes and specs. At face value, I find the spec to be pretty fun, ironically because of its simplicity, even though it's still being labeled as an advanced spec, with the ability to just chunk out gigantic amounts of healing and damage at the press and hold of a button. You won't find a ton of depth or nuance with this spec, but if a brute force healer sounds up your alley and you're already sold on just playing something new, I think Preservation now has pretty much everything it needs to be a solid, if not flat out, really good M+ healer. So what do you all think about Preservation? Have you tried it since the buffs? You already sold on it and planning on playing it as a main in Dragonflight Season 1? Or if not, what's the deal breaker for you? Love to hear from you in the comments section. And as always, if you want to see more of my videos, make sure you hit that like button on this one, subscribe to see my next one, and then check out my stream Tuesday, Thursday, Saturdays right here on YouTube, 9 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Happy healing.